I hope you see this point, because that's the image of God for most people. God is either treated as Santa Claus or Zeus. Hello and welcome to That Deacon on YouTube. I wasn't sure if I should name this video Doctrine and Culture or The Deacon and the Prophetic Voice. Both are related to what I'd like to share this month, and both titles are worthy of exploration. But I think I'll keep to my first idea, addressing doctrine as it pertains to culture. All of this talk of doctrine stemmed from two stories making the news. The first was a recent Gallop Poll stating that only 47% of Americans polled in 2020 belong to a house of worship, which is the first time that number has fallen below half since asking Americans this question. In 1937, 73% of Americans belonged to a church. In 1975, it was 71%. In 1999, it was 70%. But since then, the church membership rate has fallen by 26%. I don't dispute these numbers, but from my experience, I think the poll reflects a trend of people willing to tell the truth, as I suspect people polled in the past relied upon institutional memory over and above actual church membership. In other words, I think fewer people in the past belonged to a church, but were afraid to answer this question when asked. I say this because one aspect of my ministry involved presiding at memorials of people who would call the church and say, "I used to belong a long time ago." Or someone might say, "I grew up at the church and would like to arrange a funeral for my parents." Out of curiosity, I would sometimes seek current members who had belonged to the parish over 30 years, asking if they could recall the surname of the deceased. And most times, there was no recollection of the family. That's what I mean when I said institutional memory, and might be the reason people used to answer a polling question as having a church membership when in fact they'd not set foot in a house of worship for decades. The second story that caught my eye involves a statement from the Vatican reiterating their doctrine in that they will not bless same-sex unions, or the official statement continued to say, Roman Catholic doctrine explains that the Holy See refers to same-sex unions as a choice, describing them as sinful, saying that same-sex couples cannot be recognized as objectively ordered to God's plans. And then the statement ends with religious hubris, saying, God does not and cannot bless sin. So here we are, two seemingly unrelated stories, yet they speak volumes to the conflict between culture and doctrine. Thinking about culture and doctrine, I think, is important to remember this axiom. Since culture and doctrine are always linked over and above an actual teaching of Jesus, culture almost always wins. Let's look at a prime example demonstrating how culture influences doctrine and how theology can be influenced by culture. In the 4th century, Augustine of Hippo invented the notion of original sin. I say invented because any well-trained biblical scholar would find it hard-pressed to accept the teaching from Augustine, either based upon Genesis 3 or the passage he used found in Romans 5. He used this to come up with this rather strange theological understanding. Celtic theologian John Philip Newell often tells a story about the time he was part of an interfaith discussion panel discussing original sin. When it came to the rabbi on the panel, he said that the Jewish position is, it's original, meaning that the doctrinal logic is merely original thinking, but that's about it. While I'm at it, the Eastern Church did not accept this theological position as well. So let's open the culture box to speak a bit of truth as it pertains to Augustine's doctrinal discovery. Christianity seems to have always used baptism as a focal entry point into community. The earliest writings about baptism can be found in a 2nd century document named Didache, which means teaching. It says that converts should be instructed as to the way of living, and that baptism should be performed in living water or by dripping water on the aspirant. Both forms should invoke the Trinitarian name for God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Pretty simple. 200 years later, the Church had turned the simple practice of baptism into a multi-layered, bloated process which could take up to 2 years to complete. Due to this, adults who were the average age of baptismal candidates had fallen. The Church was no longer growing as fast as it was before. Augustine of Hippo, a bishop in Roman North Africa, came up with the doctrine to say that all people, including babies, were born stained by original sin. To protect people from going to hell, people must be baptized. Yep, that's how infant baptism got started. By instilling fear, parents began to be baptized in order to have themselves and their children saved from fire and damnation. This is a prime example of culture dictating what would become a major doctrine of faith, influencing theology for about 1,500 years. This outlandish doctrine of original sin was a major influence on the Church. And once the sin door was opened, despite the fact that people were baptized, a sinful nature was always a part of faith, turning a loving God taught by Jesus into a thunderbolt-throwing Zeus. I hope you see this point, because that's the image of God for most people. God is either treated as Santa Claus or Zeus. Once the church went to bed with empire during the time of Constantine. Original sin gave the church permission to look at non-baptized people as the other, eventually leading to discrimination and religious violence. The Protestant Reformation, as seen through the legalistic eyes of John Calvin, continued to propagate the sinful nature of humanity. And within evangelical circles, it's alive and well today. But let's not pass the blame and forget ourselves, especially if Episcopalians look at the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. Remember the prayer of humble access? In part, the prayer echoes our fallen state, saying, "We do not presume to come to this thy table, O merciful Lord, trusting in our own righteousness, but in thy manifold and great mercies." And here it comes. "We are not worthy so much as to gather up the crumbs under thy table." Why would the church membership drop so much since the 1970s? Who in their right mind would wake up early on a Sunday morning to attend a gathering for an hour or more to be simply told what a bunch of crappy human beings we all are? I'm happy to say that we in the Episcopal Church, at least in the USA, has made progress with accusatory language, but elements of Reformation language has remained out of what is sometimes called tradition. With regard to our Roman Catholic cousins, tradition and culture seem intertwined, so much so at times, I think the Vatican sometimes forgets who the servants are and who is God. I have no interest in Roman Catholicism bashing, and the religious institution has every right to dictate policy of their flock. But I do take issue when an organization says God does not and cannot bless sin, especially if they are Bible-based. If you remember, Moses was a murderer, and God certainly blessed Moses. This judgmental language is a mistake. Not necessarily for refusing to bless same-sex unions, but to believe human beings can decide for God who is in and who is out. Again, the culture of power wins out over the ethos of Jesus. Please don't feel that this talk is about bashing the established church. It is not. But I am looking at the state of religion today with a critical eye. I say these things because I honestly feel the church has been given an opportunity to adjust itself, to meet the needs of humanity. In order to do this, the church and its congregants need to unlearn things. We have been given a chance to take a look at Sunday morning rituals, which many times speak a dead language to people in great need of internal beauty, internal awareness, and transformational growth. We have been given a chance to rethink what church communities mean, and very possibly to think of church as a way to train people into the practice of living the way as taught by Jesus. To my mind, this would be a lot better than reminding people that they were sinners before birth and after birth, living a fruitless, sinful existence, waiting for Zeus God to strike. Thank you for listening to this little talk about culture and doctrine. If you are a new person watching this video, be sure to subscribe and then hit the little bell icon to be notified when a new video is available. And of course, I always enjoy reading comments and sharing in the discussion. That's all I have for you this month. And until I see you again, God bless and see you soon. Bye-bye.